Well, we've just heard about how one community, Paramore Kids Zone, is coming together to focus the attention on children and their needs, the young people. But many communities around the country are working together across sectors, across boundaries, and we have some great examples here. I'm joined by 3 wonderful examples of community work and community spirit. Clotilde Perez-Bode Dedecker, next to me, is the president and CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, which is a longtime supporter of collaboration in the city of Buffalo and the surrounding community. Greg Fischer is the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, who has helped his city bring together cradle-to-career education initiatives, leading to a record number of citizens earning college degrees. And we want to drill down on how you manage that. And Nikole Hannah-Jones is an award-winning investigative reporter for the New York Times, focusing on segregation, education, and housing issues in communities nationwide. So, Mayor Fischer, first of all, let's talk about Louisville, Kentucky, and what you have managed to achieve in this broad sweep of education.
Well, I think first the most important thing is how do you coalesce the energy of a community around what's best for kids. So what I think is lacking in a lot of our public discourse these days is people talking about these universal values that bind us all: compassion, kindness, love, equity, access, so that you can start a cultural movement, if you will, where people say, sure, every kid should have the same opportunity, every kid should have the same access as advantaged kids do in our community. So around these concepts, we started Cradle to Career, which is a system of lifelong learning. And we've made huge amounts of progress, for instance, in our college degree attainment, going from 39% to 45% with 55,000 degrees. But what we found is after we made this initial progress in all this Cradle to Career system is we faced the same barrier: poverty, lack of access, lack of equity. And that's the phase of the work that we're into right now, so that we can make sure that everybody is along for the ride. Because when we look at the problems that are plaguing our country right now, and I would say the issues behind the riots that we've experienced post-Ferguson, it's the streets of America shouting, I feel disconnected, I feel hopeless about a positive future, and that's what the street is shouting at us right now. So the question is, are we intelligent enough at a government level to redo these systems that have resulted in this lack of access, lack of equity, and lack of achievement?
And Clotilde, Mrs. Powell has talked about how communities can often come together united by kids. In Buffalo, how have you seen that as a motivating factor to bring the community together?
Yes, well, the work that we're doing in Buffalo with Say Yes to Education has been nothing short of transformational. As a funder, year in and year out, we see the wonderful organizations and the terrific programs that are helping 100 kids here and 100 kids there, all the while the macro indicators continue to head in the wrong direction. So what Say Yes has helped us do is to build the civic infrastructure to coordinate all these assets behind a very clear and compelling goal of increasing post-secondary completion for all students. And we know the power of expectations. And when you set that very clear and compelling goal that in fact college and some sort of post-secondary degree is indeed attainable for all of our students, it actually changes the behavior of all the individuals in the community, the students, their families, and all the adults that impact those students' lives as a community. And I know George Weiss is in the house, and I just have to give him a shout out and say thank you for bringing this incredible gift to Buffalo. This partnership is now over 200 members strong, and it is powered on this concept of collaborative governance, which has the public, the private, and the nonprofit sector together problem solving around dismantling institutional racism, which is the structural barrier that many of our urban youth face in public education.
I have to say, just parenthetically, I'm an old friend through my work at my university with George Weiss, and I've seen his transformative vision in community after community. So he's quite a powerful force.
A visionary with tremendous respect, Andrew, I do have to say, for the power of place and the importance of local context, local ownership, and local assets. That is really critical to the Say Yes approach.
Now, you spoke of institutional racism, and it is the de facto segregation that we see in community after community. Nikole, you've encountered this and struggled to communicate it, to report it to the larger community. Tell me what you see as the real barrier in communities that you have covered as an investigative journalist.
I mean, I think the real barrier is we say that we believe all kids are deserving of the same quality of education, but we do things that produce very different results. I think as long as we continue to separate and segregate students by race and by income, we're never going to have true educational equality. And I would say Louisville has been an example of a place that has refused to do that, even when the Supreme Court told Louisville that its desegregation program was unconstitutional. It's kept going. And I think part of the results that you guys have seen is from that unwillingness to walk away from integration. If we're really doing what's best for kids, we know that you cannot isolate Black and Latino kids and kids living in poverty in schools separate from middle class and white children and expect to receive the same results.
How do you break through those barriers? Because it's rooted in neighborhoods, in housing, in city after city, in ways that are profoundly difficult to overcome.
Yeah, I think what I've tried to show with my work is that this segregation is created. We kind of want to pretend that it's accidental or incidental or people are just choosing. We've made a decision not to enforce the Fair Housing Act to allow people to move into communities of opportunity. Even in communities such as in Brooklyn and in parts of Manhattan that are gentrifying, the schools are not reflecting the gentrification of the neighborhoods, because I think overall we've had very, very little leadership around these issues. You don't see politicians, whether they are conservative or progressive, really pushing communities to integrate and saying that this is the right thing. I think it is something that has been considered politically toxic for a long time. What I'm hoping is that when we have seen all of these communities uniting around the concept of public education with our new education secretary, that will produce some leadership to actually do something about the inequality in schools that is directly attributed to segregation.
Well, and you've got to be provocative, and you have to lean into it. I mean, the facts are in our public school system, our disadvantaged kids are showing up 3 years behind the advantaged kids at age 6. And how do we expect those kids to catch up? Maybe 10 or 20% do, but as a society, we seem more than willing to pay for the consequences of that in over-incarceration, down-the-road problems, as opposed to changing these systems and investing up front. I think our social contract that we have in our country needs major correction. Our education system is built around an agricultural economy with traditional families. What do we have now? Rapidly changing global economy, non-traditional families. But we act like our public school system should operate the same. We need new principles around developing the whole child, like, say, Yes Foundation, like the Weiss Institute does, and recognize that social and emotional well-being, physical and mental health, are as important barriers or as important milestones for our kids as 3rd grade reading level, 8th grade graduation. We understand what those mean as a society, but we don't understand these other markers that kids that don't have advantage suffer with every day. So we need to fundamentally, A, address it, because the consequences are severe from an economic and public safety standpoint, and then do something about it.
Mr. Mayor, and to all of you, how do you get past the partisan divide so that communities can communicate across all sorts of barriers? I mean, we saw very little real conversation about education in this last political campaign from either side.
I mean, I can tell you that in Buffalo, this is above and beyond any kind of partisan politics or any kind of party approach. This is about our economy, right? And Say Yes to Education, Andrea, is an economic initiative that uses education as the strategy. It's about the workforce of the future, and it's about ensuring that we have the full benefit of our human capital. And it's about taking the assets we do have and connecting them in new ways to get new results. And at the end of the day, so we're in year 5, in Buffalo, it's fair to say, so what? right? Lots of people, lots of time, lots of meetings, lots of charitable contributions, and what we've seen is a continuous uptick in terms of the high school graduation rates, which have increased 15 percentage points, and 10% increase in post-secondary matriculation. And what that 15% doesn't tell you necessarily is that all students have benefited. The white kids have increased their high school graduation rates by 8 percentage points, but all the cohorts of students of color, because we track it to make sure that we understand the efficacy of the effort, have increased the high school graduation rates by double-digit percentages. So the work is effective, and now you need to continue to deepen and expand and build on and leverage this coordinated approach that has the public sector as a key partner, because the largest funder in all of our communities will always be government. And to the degree that philanthropic capital can work with government to get better results, then our communities are better for it.
And economic development, I agree with you, but work is also about the soul of our country. Do we really care to have a country where every child has the opportunity to succeed? If today is an average day in America, there will be 29 boys and young men of color killed in the cities of America. 29 a day. If there were 29 people being killed in a different shopping mall around our country every day, our country would be going crazy.
And, you know, as a journalist, I mean, I see that in the way mass media, not just the networks, but the newspapers respond to what's happening in Chicago in comparison to children in Chicago, in comparison to what happens when one or another, you know, white community is affected by violence. I mean, Nikole, it's just, Ferguson was probably the first time that the nation as a whole, Ferguson and what happened in Baltimore and some of these other experiences that have galvanized the country, where we've finally focused on the violence that prevents kids from getting a proper education.
Yeah, I think that a large part of my work is trying to convince folks that these are all of our children. And I think when you segregate and marginalize groups of people, then it becomes easy for us to ignore them, and it becomes easy for us to think that they're not like my kids, or these are not children that I need to fight for. And so much of my work is trying to push back on that story. I actually went down to Ferguson long after many of the reporters had left, and I wrote about the school district that Michael Brown went to, and how his school district was the worst school district in the state. It was the most segregated and the poorest district in the state, and that while he died a terrible death, the most harm that black children are facing are being undereducated in inferior schools, and that they're setting them up really for a lifetime of failure, that our schools, I mean, what's interesting is, yes, many black and brown children enter school behind, but the schools are actually harming them. The longer they stay in segregated schools, the further and further they fall behind. So instead of schools closing the gap, they're actually widening the gap. And all of us as Americans should be appalled at that. I think what's going to be very clear is half of all American children are going to be of color. And already half of all public school children are of color. So if we're going to continue to provide an unequal, low-quality education for half of our population, everyone's going to suffer. It's not just going to be contained to those populations anymore. Who's going to pay our Social Security? Who's going to fill these high-tech jobs that we need? So I think our fates, we need to understand that our fates are intertwined, and I think we have been deluding ourselves to think that this was just going to harm those communities and not, that the chickens won't come home to roost for the rest of us.
And what I think what some people fail to realize is the educational value, the experiential value that all of us have of meeting people of different backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds and histories, that our education is so enriched by the diversity of our school populations.
Well, and your economic competitiveness is as well. I mean,
right.
This is the strength of the United States of America. It has been since our founding values, and now it's more beautiful than ever before, and so we need to celebrate it more than ever. I have good news from Louisville, in that, you know, businesses understand this issue of demographics. So if we can't get you through the heart, or we can't get you through public safety reasons, then we're going to hit you in the pocketbook. You have to have workforce. to help you continue to flourish in your business. We've grown from 200 people employed in our Summer Works program, youth, to 5,100 in 5 years, because businesses have said, we want to help, and we say, then you hire some kids this summer, and they're responding.
Well, I want to thank all of you. I so like the idea of saying that this is a battle for the soul of America. I don't think anyone could have expressed it better than you. Thank you, Nikole, Mr. Mayor, Clotilde. And now we have a very special announcement, an exciting announcement about a new special partnership between America's Promise Alliance and Say Yes to Education, which we've talked about in Buffalo, but what George Weiss has done in Say Yes is really extraordinary. So I want to thank you all, and we'll move on to that announcement. Thank you.